as we automate the world, the whole world becomes digitally connected to everything on the planet. What that does do is generate ridiculous amounts of data, ridiculous amounts.
Ultimately, things like traceability and the ability to leverage technology will become a differentiator. The easier you are as a supplier, as a customer, et cetera, to do business with, that's a value. And that's part of the total value equation as a company that you'd offer.
Welcome to FutureFoodCast today. We're fortunate to have Craig Gentry from Idahoan Foods, who's going to talk to us about Idahoan and what their role is in the food supply chain, so we can better understand, as a supplier, in a sense, what they provide, who they serve, and some of the successes and some of the challenges that they face in today's world. So with that, thanks for tuning in to FutureFoodCast. We're inviting thought leaders in today's food industry to discuss the trends in technology that will shape the future of food. So with that background, Craig, welcome to our Foodcast today.
Thanks, Jim, for having me. I appreciate it and looking forward to it.
So it's great to have you on the show. Would you mind telling our guests what your role is at Idahoan?
Absolutely. So I'm Vice President of Food Service, also the General Manager for the Food Service Business Unit, and I sit on the executive team responsible for our entire business.
Oh, okay. So that's a broad scope. It's a big challenge for sure. It covers lots of different areas. So with that, just taking a look, there's many different aspects in the food supply chain today, and Idahoan is probably affected by or servicing many of them. So in the markets that you go after, tell us a little bit about the markets that you're addressing and serving.
Sure. So we really have two sides to the business in North America and expanding internationally. But in the US and North American business, we've got a retail side. It's our more mature side of the business, and certainly where you'd recognize the Idahoan brand. We've had this business for around 60 years, starting from a grower cooperative and then through a couple different iterations to the business we are today. On the food service side, the technology that originally was dehydrated potatoes is where it started, and that's where we've grown from. We're a rapidly growing business, expanding and selling into all of the food service outlets that you would see across the landscape in North America, including Canada, obviously. We are also expanding internationally. We currently today do some business in the UK, and we ship to over 100 companies and countries in the world our products. So quite a big scope and lots of room for growth as well.
All right, great. So you're growing in the marketplace. Tell me a little bit to understand about the products. What does the product line cover from your perspective? What's in it?
Sure. So the primary products that we offer are what's known in the industry as dehydrated. We like the term fresh dried, and I'll explain that as we go through a little bit later. But our fresh dried products, based on the technology that we use, deliver a high quality mashed, hash brown, or casserole potato product to consumers and to food service. We do have a soup business, a dehydrated soup business on the retail side as well. But the bulk of our product mix comes from potatoes grown in Idaho, 100%. We're very proud of that, and that's what we deliver to consumers and operators in the food service space.
Interesting. So a couple of things that are important, I think, in the marketplace we see is increasing demand on the consumer side. One of them is everybody today is concerned about environmental, social governance and related to sustainability goals from the UN. They have the sustainability development goals, they call it, for 17 of those kind of things, to try to measure that sort of impact that companies and, in a sense, consumers are having, in a sense, on the environment and so on. That said, tell me a little bit more from a sustainability perspective about, in a sense, how you see Idahoan products positioned in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. We're at the very beginning of our real sustainability journey in terms of articulating that in the marketplace. If you think about where we're from and the grower cooperative that we came from, sustainability is built into our DNA, but we haven't really articulated it well. And so we're just starting to do that with our purpose statement, our vision statement, where we talk about sustainability. And when we think about sustainability, CSR, and then ESG, the measurements that come behind that, we really think about it in a couple ways. We think about the land that we're a part of and where our products come from. We think about our growers and their ability to continue to produce that product in rotation format. And then we think about our end consumer. And again, whether that's a consumer in a home or a consumer in a restaurant, we think about those. And if you think about the supply chain from when the potatoes come to our door until they're delivered ultimately to their end destination, there's a lot of waste inherent in the food manufacturing process. And there's many studies done, but up to 40% of product that comes out of the ground ultimately just goes into the trash. And so one of the unique aspects of our process is that we're able to use basically any raw material that's still in potato form and produce an outstanding product. And so that really allows us to step into a space and reduce that waste footprint significantly. And as we start to articulate our journey a little bit better, we'll start to come out and understand what that waste reduction percentage is. So that's one aspect of it. And the other element of it is because we are a fresh dried or a dehydrated product, we're able to get our product into, again, the consumer's hands with a much lower CO2 footprint in terms of trucks on the road, manufacturing, and those kinds of things. And so we really have a role to play there in helping the consumer understand the value of that. We ship about 20% of the trucks. If you were to take a potato and ship it anywhere in the country, we need about 20% of the trucks that's required to ship, a fresh potato to the same destination. And so that's a really important element. We're simply just removing the water and then shipping it to the consumer. So that's another element that we really feel we have a role to play in. So there's quite a big story that we can tell. And we're looking forward to really articulating that in a much more concise approach as we go forward.
Yeah, that's a pretty big impact for sure. As you said, the numbers are huge. From a shipping perspective, logistics going out from, I'll call it, your plants out through the different either food service chains to distributors, wholesalers, or off to the larger retailers and so on. That's a tremendous impact. I'm guessing, and I don't know this for a fact, I don't know where the plants are. The markets are sort of all over, as you said. It's all of North America, a little bit of Europe now. And so all of that major, what I call probably long haul distribution, is now highly efficient because of the product you're using. I think exactly. I'm going to guess on the other side of the fence, when it comes in from the farm to you, to the processing plants, it's probably still somewhat the same. I assume that side of it doesn't change much.
Actually, because of the nature of our product, so being Idahoan and having our potatoes sourced 100% from Idaho, our furthest growers are less than 150 miles away from our plants, and our plants our furthest plant is about 100 miles away from our corporate office, and so all of them are in a radius of call it 150 miles, and so there actually is a lower footprint there. Again, we when you think about the growing areas of the country, there's certainly a terroir that's associated with Idaho in terms of soil and climate and water that allows us to source from a really relatively small footprint. So
that's excellent. Yeah, because you hear about I'll call it fresh food products being shipped from all over the world, and by comparison, that's a much more expensive proposition when you look at the environment, carbon management, all that sort of stuff. So that's a big impact. So yours is obviously a very different story in that area, which is great.
It is.
So some of the other things I would assume with the way your products work is, in general, a couple of things. They're probably going to have a longer shelf life as well. Either in the food service channel or over on the retail side, which is another win as well from a sustainability perspective. And then also, I guess, what about the relative cost of the product? I assume that has a story as well in terms of the cost for consumers relative to other products that they can choose to consume.
Yeah, there's a couple of points in that actually, and one is in terms of CSR. And if you think about the product that we have and the fresh dried nature of that product, it does have a much longer shelf life, so it's suitable for storage over long periods and small footprint versus fresh and frozen produce. But the other thing is, because it's very economically viable, we were able to satiate not only hunger but also nutritional needs in a relatively inexpensive format. So the value equation is really, really high, and that's something we also really try to educate consumers on, try to educate operators on, and whether it's a fully flavored product a very clean product in terms of, no additional ingredients. We can kind of do that both ways with anywhere from, 9 months to a year shelf life. So quite a bit of opportunity there for savings, both in storage and also in cost for both the consumer and the operator. So a unique aspect too.
Yeah, that's great. And then the other thing you had mentioned last time we talked was about the fact that the way you're processing product and shipping it, in effect, it is a form of, I'll call it upcycling in the industry, in a sense, different than, when I go to my local store and buy, I'll call it fresh potatoes, from the shelf. It's very different as a process.
It is. There was a movement many years ago called the ugly produce movement, and what they aimed to do really was just take produce that maybe didn't look, as you would expect it to look on a pretty plate, but talk about the concept of using it. Still very usable, and it's similar with us. We can take very small tomatoes or potatoes, imperfect potatoes, and do a lot with those, and even contracting with some of the larger manufacturers, French fries that need a really long and perfect potato to produce their product, we're able to take the parts that they're not able to use and turn that again into a finished product that the consumer would recognize as the same as their mom's or their dad's mashed potatoes. So that's definitely a benefit of the process that we use.
Yeah, so that's another big part of the story as well. So I'll plead as a consumer who just goes to the store, buys stuff and eats, or goes out to a restaurant and just eats. Either way, I'm eating all the time. I'm not always aware, but I assume some of the shifts that we all have today, whether it be for my reasons for health or whatever, freshness, but in general, we're seeing a higher demand for consumers to understand what the food is that they're trying to consume, where it comes from, and so on. And so maybe you can talk to me a little bit about how on your end you're trying to, in a sense, help educate the market, not just the retailers, maybe in the food service clients you have, but actually the end consumers as well.
Sure. So a couple pieces in there. One is around the nutritional value of a potato, and the high quality proteins that are in there. The carbohydrates that are really great from a nutritional perspective. But then in terms of just the satiating quality of a potato and the canvas, we talk about the canvas a lot that it represents to carry flavors. And so we talk to consumers a lot about that. If you're looking for something that's very simple to use, that can carry these flavors, these global flavors that we're all sort of craving, whether you're eating at home or you're eating out in a restaurant, it's very good for that. Potatoes provide a lot of opportunity, and not just in mashed form, but in shred form and slice form as well. And so all of those things, allow the consumer to put something really compelling on their plate. In terms of the restaurant side of the business and trying to help chefs understand and help patrons understand, we talked a little bit before about the potatoes coming from fields very close by. There's a farm to table sort of mystique that's been around for quite some time, and that's that local food. And I like to think of it as we're very much farm to table. From the time a potato comes out of the ground or comes out of one of our storage sheds, it's less than 6 hours until it's in a dehydrated, a fresh dried format that then we can ship out. So it very much is close to the earth and close to the locale where it was shipped from. So that's a unique story. And the pandemic sort of provided us this unique window where consumers and chefs were more open to understand what would the value of this be. There's many products that are freeze dried, fresh dried, dehydrated, that we assume and believe are very high quality, because they are. Beef jerkies and different things like that, and potatoes are no different. And so it's allowed us to take this opportunity to say, where you were preparing something fresh before from a fresh produce perspective, you get that same quality with what you're putting on the plate with our product. And you get it in a much more economical, much more sustainable, much less waste manner. And that's what we've really taken this window of time to do, and it's been quite successful. So
yeah, the other thing I noticed, like I looked at your website as an example, and there's a lot of information out there, honestly, about all the different products that you offer and so on. One of the things, I'm not like my son. He's a first-class chef. I'm the other end of the spectrum. I'm the worst-class chef you ever met. And what's nice is when I go to your website, I see a bunch of recipes out there for what I call the cooking challenge, like myself. So it makes it easier for most of us to say, what can I do with this stuff? And it becomes simple to, in a sense, whip up a dish fairly quickly, which is kind of nice for those of us that can't do stuff. That's excellent. So
Well, and you bring up a good point because, whether you're cooking at home and you're aspiring to be a chef, even from, the bottom of the barrel, maybe as you mentioned,
Right, right.
or you're a little bit, more talented, the idea around ease and simplicity, right? I mean, and I love to cook. I love to cook at home. There are certain things I can do, but I can't prepare a full restaurant quality meal. I don't have that much talent, but I can do a few things. And if I can have a helper, an easy to prepare shred, hash brown, mashed potato, that's perfect. I can concentrate on those things where maybe I can do a little better and take a little less time for me. But when you look at restaurants, and especially today, and you think about the labor challenges we're having at the moment, which are extreme. It's almost hard to get good service in a restaurant anywhere in the country these days, and it doesn't matter whether it's casual dining, family dining, fine dining. It doesn't matter. It's very difficult. And so, the whole idea around removing labor from items like a mashed potato or some of your starches and some of your sides is very compelling for a couple of reasons. A, because the labor is not there, but B, even from a mistake perspective. If you were to make a mistake on something as simple as a side that then was perceived to be low value for the entire dish, because a consumer often judges their, at least I do when I'm in a restaurant, I judge the whole meal, not just simply a component of it. That
Right.
allows us to provide that opportunity for the restaurateur to take that worry out of the equation and make it very simple. Just pour water, stir, and ready to go. And so that's a really, really compelling piece.
Yeah, you're right. Because not only is there a shortage, but also with the high amount of turnover you have today in restaurants, where, I'd say when I used to go out 5 years ago, I saw the same people every time when I went to the restaurant,
Right.
and they knew me too. There was no change. But now you're right, you're seeing a lot of change. And so anything that simplifies, I'll call it that learning and that onboarding process for them is a good deal as well, for
Absolutely.
sure. And the other thing too, and I don't know if the food service side, because I don't run a restaurant, I've worked in them, but don't run one. But on the consumer side, there's also a demand for more nutritional information, which I do see is on your website as well. Any thoughts on how, outside beyond the website, which I've checked, is there anything else that you do to try to open up the doors for consumers to understand, in a sense, what the product is and what the value to them is?
Sure. I mean, we work within the bounds of whatever operator we're working with, right? I mean, there are some, and depending on the legislation in the state that you work in and the size of your operation in terms of numbers of units, you either have to publish full nutritional information. But even when you're not, I think consumers, I'm certainly myself, are much more aware of what they're eating when they go out. And so, as we move our product to cleaner and cleaner label, we're moving sort of at the speed that the consumer is ready for. But we're certainly trying to move and move them as well to something that's better and better for them. And so, to the extent that there's a commercial market and we feel like we can provide that, we do. But we certainly are able to provide any of the nutritional values that we need to. One of the things we're really excited about, and again, kind of relies on the technology that we have in processing, which is very hands off, I guess, if you would say, are a line of clean label products called Honest Earth. And so those are completely free of any preservatives. They are packaged, have a 6 to 9 month shelf life, and really, again, allow a very focused restaurant on a farm to table or clean label perspective to still, again, serve really high quality without having the massive amount of labor that's required to produce all of that from scratch, which is typically what happens when you have a clean label focused restaurant or operation. And so that's something that we'll continue to move forward with, and we'll continue to expand that line. And we've seen great success so far from it.
So when you go to, I call the end product is always the consumer, whether I'm in a restaurant or in purchasing from a retail outlet. Anything that you have to do with the partner channels? I'm guessing you use wholesalers, distributors on the retail side, and maybe distributors over on the food service side as well. Is there anything that they need to know about your products and your delivery model?
Well, I think everybody in the industry, I mean, we're all focused on a more sustainable system, and that includes kind of all of the CSR components of it up and down the stakeholder sort of life cycle of a product. And so we're articulating better our strategy. We are capturing more the initiatives that we have in place. We're prepared to supply those to our partners. We get more and more requests every day, whether it's in the retail channel from our big retail partners, in the food service space from our distributor partners, and even our chains, and even in smaller units that we're dealing with. They want to understand not just what's in our product, but also, how we're stewarding our resources, whether it's the land and the farmers that we deal with, our employees. That's a huge piece as well. They want to understand that, and so you know as well as I do, there's lots of great examples out there of companies that have been on that journey for a long time, and then there's a lot of other companies that are really just starting that journey, have a great base to start from, but need to again better articulate, such as ourselves, and that's what we're doing. And so it's certainly something I'm passionate about, my team's passionate about. From some previous roles that I've held, it's something I've seen provide a great deal of benefit, again, all up and down the value chain. And so it's something we're really focused on here, and I'm excited that we've really kind of stepped into that journey, with both feet. We've articulated that we want to delight and nourish lives. It's on the purpose statement behind me. And that in itself is an implicit, sort of meaning that we want to go beyond just, providing a good quality, food product. And so there's a lot more in that. So
yeah.
It takes up quite a bit of my time, and happy that it does at this point. So
yeah, I do see on the website that there's quite a bit about the sustainability focus and who you serve, and the thoughts behind how you're trying to, in a sense, help all the different stakeholders as well. That's an important thing today. You're right, as a message. The other thing I'll say is the pandemic certainly changed a lot of things in a couple of ways. It certainly had an impact on supply chains big time. Can you tell us a little bit more about the pandemic impact on, in a sense, there's a whole end of your business. You start at the grower end, you wind up at either food service or retail. And tell me a little bit about what that supply chain impact has been from your perspective.
Sure. The trick will be to tell you a little bit, I think, because there's a lot, and as you said, when the pandemic hit and everybody was impacted, the supply chains were sort of exposed in terms of where their focus was. And we're no different than anybody else. We've been very fortunate in that, we've got a great manufacturing capability. We have a great team there. And so, by and large, we've maintained very high levels of supply, but it hasn't been without challenges. The other challenge for us too is that you've got to remember that the planning for crops, goes on around the time that the pandemic hit. That's the time that planting is about to start, and so you've got growers that are making decisions based on what their perception is. And so there was a lot of discussion with our raw material team, who have deep relationships in the community with the growers, and that was really important for us to try to help provide them data. Give them assurances that we would continue to be good partners, as we have for a number of years, and that as we came out of this and experienced the rocky road, which has continues to be here, that we would partner with them. And so obviously the retail business took off extremely fast. 200% supply in March and April of last year was not uncommon at all. And then since then, it's been quite a bit of a roller coaster is the best way to describe it. And not just with, the numbers coming in terms of the pandemic, but also just public perception, those kinds of things. And sort of the opposite has happened on the food service side. It was interesting to see in May and June, the huge bounce back of consumers really getting out in the market because they'd missed that social occasion of, sharing a meal. And then, as we kind of go back into fall, what that will look like. So supply chain has probably been the biggest challenge. Like I said, we've been really fortunate, but it's something we continue to stay hyper focused on, just because of the nature of this pandemic. And like I said, consumer behavior and just the concern in general. We've got to be ready for that sort of spike in demand on either side of the business. But at least, our product line does lend itself a little bit to some stockpiling that we can do to try to smooth out some of those curves in demand. So.
Yeah, it's great. And the other thing it does is it makes you realize, as a vendor in a supply chain, that you have to figure out how to be, I'll call it, highly reactive to changes in demand. 5 years ago, nobody would have thought of, can you plan for this scenario? And you'd have said, no, it's not part of what we have to worry about. And
Sure.
Today, now you think differently about it. With that, given the products you have, did it also impact the product mix on your end for what, in a sense, went more toward retail versus, because you have raw product coming in that you're processing all the time? And I don't know if the overall demand went up or down. I'm going to guess it went way up in retail, way down in food service. But overall, I assume that there was probably strong demand. But the trick is, I'm going to guess, did the mix change at all for you?
Oh, sure. And the mix between channels, retail, food service changed. The mix within channels changed in terms of what the products were being demanded. We, like a lot of manufacturers, made some decisions early in the pandemic to make sure we could supply our top 80% of SKUs. And so we did take some product off the shelf for a while. It was the right thing to do because it allowed us to be produce in a little higher speed manner. And then in food service, we did the same thing. We took that opportunity to probably take some tail that we needed to move off and do that, and also allowed us to fulfill demand. I think the biggest benefit we saw is that, at least on the food service side, is that sort of the segments that we were really targeted and focused on did quite well over the pandemic. And so some of that fast casual, QSR, and even some of the casual dining that we had that was able to hold on, did well. The other thing we benefited from on the food service side is just the ability of our product to travel. Delivery, as you've seen, skyrocketed, and there are certain things that lend themselves to delivery and certain things that aren't. And mashed potatoes and even hash browns are conducive to that. They maintain quality, and so that did help us. And again, I think as a looking at our peer set and also looking at the industry as a whole, we did quite well and outperformed on the food service side. Having said that, we certainly were below where we were in 2019, but overall we did well. And yes, the spike in demand for the whole company was significant. And again, just goes back to my comment around supply chain and sort of that all hands on deck feeling, and the great employees that we have, and the great supply chain team that we have. So,
well, yeah, it does sound like your company overall, just from the product line, what you're doing, and so on, was far better positioned to, in a sense, do well during that massive impact shift than a lot of other companies that either have very long supply chains physically, or are trying to manage, I'll call it, fresh product in a way certainly much more challenged. Or maybe the product's completely different between food service and retail, as an example. So some of those things were challenged. But I'm sure there was some impact, I'll say, just in logistics in general, in the sense that I think, from what I understand, the trucking, the whole transportation side, in a sense, did impact everybody. Yours is more compact product, which is good, but still just getting shippers and so on and reliably to show up all the time is one thing. The other thing that would be a challenge as well is you depend on packaging, right? And I don't know if there was an impact there as well.
Again, we were reasonably fortunate. We're buying significant quantities, and while our demand spiked, I mean, typically we're more than a few months out on packaging, and again, fortunate that we weren't in the middle of a brand change or a brand refresh or anything like that, which would have had major impact. Certainly, we've seen the increase in costs across the board on supply, in terms of pallets, in terms of trucking, fuel surcharges, all those kinds of things, and certainly that'll find its way down to packaging as well, and we're already seeing that. So we, like most of our peer set, have been looking at and passing through price increases. But we're also really focused, as I think everybody would be. But again, kudos to our supply chain team for really finding ways to reduce cost, because ultimately that's the best we can do. One of the things I was really pleased to see coming out of this is finally restaurants on the food service side really started to take some price, and they needed to. There was a number of years where there was just no pricing being passed on to the consumer, and the cost that you pay for a meal really didn't, or the price you pay for a meal didn't really reflect the cost that was going into it. So you're seeing that, and continue to see that, and I think it's conditioned the consumer a little bit more to that price increase on the food service side. But there's been a huge
definitely changed. And while their prices have gone up significantly, the reality is I don't think you're a major part of that increase. It's really the labor side that's the big part of that, right? Because as you said, it's a hard time getting labor, and the labor they get has to be radically priced a lot higher than it used to be. So it makes sense that their prices go up for sure. As part of the whole pandemic thing too, the other issue is it highlighted the whole instantly highlighted, I'll say, the whole concern that consumers have, everybody has, over food safety. So we have the regulations that are coming in place, the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2015 that takes effect in 2024. For sure. So that has an impact. That was having an impact anyway on how people think about food safety and what you're responsible for, I'll say, before the pandemic. But
Sure.
the pandemic itself just says, wait a minute, we all care about that now. It's no longer like number 20 on my list of things. It's in my top 3 of what I want to know about. And so, yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the impact on food safety, sanitation, and processing, and how that has worked.
Sure. There are some big stories, around food safety coming into the pandemic, right? And, many retailers and manufacturers and, food service operators had some big challenges. And so it was certainly top of mind, and it hasn't gone away. One of the things that, we've done, and I think we're not unlike many, is, we really needed to get in place an ERP system that would be sort of scalable around the idea of traceability. And so we've done that. We're in the final stages where we're in implementation. We've gone live, but working out the bugs of a new ERP system. So that'll really allow us now to, bolt in the other systems that we need to really drive traceability. I think we're probably where most of the industry is in terms of that planning process up to the 2024 timeline. And again, we're a bit fortunate in that we have very close access to a lot of things that go on. But I, like you and most consumers, want to know what's going on in my food product, and again, not just from a raw material perspective, but from packaging and from employee relations and those kinds of things. And so fortunately, again, we work with a lot of really great partners, both suppliers and those who we supply to. And so there's a lot of collaboration and understanding there, and a lot of discussion on what's important, what's mandatory, what's important, what's possible, and then we're in that mix, and what are we going to do? Because I think there's a tendency for people to get frozen a bit around all the things that possibly could be done, but ultimately, you've got to be able to commercialize a product within the regulation set, and then also meet consumer demand. And so it's pretty complex, but it is something that I think our base systems are now in place, and we're ready to really dive in and tackle some of those now.
So yeah, picking up on your new ERP system, one of the things, as you mentioned, if it's going to help with traceability, if you will, then I assume it has the capability, I should say, to work at what I call a lot or a case level from a tracking perspective, which is important. So within your organization, it makes it easy. I guess the benchmark against that, if I think about the industry, is there's 2 big cases that stood out. I can't remember, it was 4 years ago, I think. We had that romaine lettuce recall across the US, where they couldn't trace anything. They said, okay, we've got some bad romaine lettuce. Let's just get rid of all romaine lettuce for 3 months and start over. Call it a restart, which almost effectively happened across everything. And not just the fresh produce product, but even the products that, in a sense, had romaine in it were all off the shelf for a long period of time. Which is definitely a horror show for everybody. All the suppliers, the supply chain, the consumers, you're all impacted. The other one I had followed a little bit was the USDA had a recall effort on some Bing cherries that came out of 2 farms in California that had a problem. They were, in a sense, infected with bacteria. They actually did trace it back to the right 2 farms that were the source of the problem. And they were able to remediate that. The problem was it literally took the USDA and CDC together, and along with all the other people in the supply chain, it took them over 10 months to get to idea from the point that they said, hey, we got a problem, to, hey, can we pinpoint where it really is? And where in a sense, where the product from those 2 farms went to forward through the supply chain. They did all that, but the effort to do it took 10 months and a lot of cost. With your new ERP system in place, I'm going to guess, because you're going to have the capability to internally identify that kind of tracking. So if I came to you and said, hey, I got a bad product here, you could trace it all the way back, through your own process. And as you mentioned, it sounds like you're going to be looking to integrate with the other members or companies in your supply chain, right? Going back to the growers a little bit, going forward into the distributors and so on, where did these cases go? Because to get the answer from the endpoint of saying, whatever, if they found something bad at a food service thing, How do we take it all the way back to where it came from? And then how do we go forward and say, oh, this case got shipped to, or these cases got shipped to, 3 other locations or something like that?
Well, fortunately, from the point it leaves or goes into a case at our plant until it gets to the end user, I mean, that's very traceable today and has been. So that's good news. And our distributor partners, our retail partners, ourselves, we have a pretty good process in place. Can always be improved, but pretty robust at the moment that we can get to that very quickly. The challenge is when you go upstream, right? And if you think about, truckloads of potatoes or any other product entering a plant and how you segregate those. And so, certainly, some of our plants are highly automated. Others are on a schedule to become automated, and that becomes important. Again, you've got to have a system that can work with you and grow that. But once you've got that in place, then you can really invest in that automation, and it pays off. And ultimately, it's about, again, speeding up, as you mentioned. 10 months is just, if you think about all the scary elements of that, there's the consumer trust, there's the loss of product, there's a brand, there's also even an industry, stigma. I'm sure that other suppliers of cherries were radically impacted by that. It's just the world we live in, and so we really aim to drive that back up the value chain, is all the way to grower level. So at a minimum, we reduce that waste and reduce that time. But that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of data. Again, it's data's great, but you can't use it for anything, then it doesn't really help you out. And so it's not just having the data, but how do you get to it quickly and analyze it and use it to your benefit? So
yeah, and you brought up a really big point, which is right, that ultimately at the end of the day, my cherry farm had nothing to do with the problem, but I'm impacted because people go, I don't know if I can eat cherries now, just because you can't get a clear answer. So the ability to, in a sense, make that happen better is a win for the entire segment of whatever that industry is. In your case, it's obviously a good thing that you have, I'll call it that coordination. The other thing that's a huge win in your case is, as you say, while you're still going after the same retail outlets that maybe I buy Bing cherries from, and maybe you're hitting the same food service outlets, the difference is your supplier side of it. Your suppliers, the growers, is such a shorter chain that's a little bit easier to manage than somebody who's bringing in product from all over the world, right? Through a lot of what I call intermediaries that have to handle that product. That makes it much more complex.
it does, but we still have, we have ingredients that go into that are, coming from different areas. And so, it still impacts us, more so on the retail side than the food service side, because we tend to have more flavors there. So, we're fortunate to have, that proximity to our growers, but there are other elements that we've got to monitor, even into packaging and equipment. And so I don't think anybody's immune, from the need to have that data, no matter where whether your raw ingredients or your manufacturing materials come from. So
yeah, no, you're right. Good point, because the ingredients matter as well. So that logically brings me to another point. From your point of view, with everything that you are doing and the things that you're trying to change, tell me from your perspective, what are the key technologies that are helping you?
Sure. I'm a big believer in leveraging data, and that's coming back from sort of the sales side. And obviously data is important, running a business of any type, but it's not, again, having the data, it's what are you going to do with it? And it's almost saying no, more than it is saying yes, because there's so many data points that you can have that just exist in a system that you've got to be able to act on. So for us in my business unit, it's really around technologies that will help us understand our customers better and interface with our customers better. And whether that's as simple as a customer relationship management software or trade spend software, or ultimately, hopefully, an interface on one of those two platforms or another with our customers in terms of supply chain and forecasting, or in terms of traceability, and plugging those systems in together. So I see a huge benefit in that area. From a more macro level on Idahoan Foods overall, I think, again, it's that traceability. That's a really, really big one for us. And then you can even look at it in terms of, sort of what does AI and machine learning bring to the table? Those are big, huge sort of black boxes that you can jump into. So you've got to be really deliberate. You got to be first clear on what your strategy is. in terms of, how you go to market and how you get your products to market. And then you decide, what the tools are and what those, what aspects of AI or machine learning that you can really leverage. So, gosh, we could probably talk for hours about the technology, but
I won't go too far down that road, but you did bring up one good point, so I'm going to push back on it. So you are correct. As we automate the world, the whole world becomes digitally connected to everything on the planet. What that does do is generate ridiculous amounts of data, ridiculous amounts.
Mhm.
You hit the point, it's not what data do I have, it's what am I going to do with the data? And that's actually the biggest, most important part about data. It's not having data, it's asking, what are the problems I'm trying to solve? What are the decisions I have to make on those? And then what is the data and the currency of that data that I need to make those decisions? And to your point, you're taking the right approach to engineer it backward from that point, because the amount of data you have today is ridiculous. And it's a matter of, in a sense, taking that use case, as you said, to figure out what the decisions are, the timing that needs to be, the currency, the data, and so on, and saying, hey, this is the stuff I need. And if I've got all this data over here on the right, I just need to get these data elements current so I can make these decisions on a timely basis. And that's really, from an engineering perspective, the right way that everybody should be thinking about the operation of these systems, for sure. That's a huge thing. And a lot of people just get lost. I hate to say it, I'm a technologist, not like you. And so what's different is I sit on the other side of the fence, and I'm the guy that says, look at all the data, look what I brought you. And he'll look at me and go, Jim, you brought me a mess. I need this. Thanks for the mess, but now can you give me what I really need for the decisions? And that's really where we need to get to, which is, it's nice that when you have somebody on the business side who's driving the bus, so to speak, and say, this is where we need to go. From a data perspective, these are the decisions I need to make. And this is the kind of data I have to have from you to do that.
Well, that's exactly right. And what I found is that, people when they receive, sort of the presentation on here's what can be provided, a lot of times you forget what, maybe not your strategy, but you sort of forget what the focal point of execution of your strategy is, because you've got this new shiny object. And again, if it doesn't help you in your efficiency or your effectiveness or your execution, you've really got to question whether or not it's what you need. The great thing is, with all the data that's out there and all the tools to do it, there's almost a solve for everything that you can imagine. It's just being really disciplined and saying, again, yes, we're going to use this because it will help us get, X% or X degree better in our execution. But again, the power is always in saying no, versus saying yes. So.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And it's interesting, having worked with lots of different companies in lots of industries, that is exactly the difference in terms of delivering, I'll call it, better results, is that ability to define ahead of time, what are the decisions I need to make? What are the problems I'm trying to solve? And what's the data I need? If I look at just that side of it, it's always a business person that's really driving that truck for me. And then it's easy to be on the truck and say, fine, what do you need? I'll go get it.
Sure.
That's my problem.
Sure.
You really need somebody who's driving the truck in the right direction. And that's pretty cool. So that's the big thing on technology that sort of covers everything that I had, because I do think that that's going to change. It helps. A couple of things technology does over time. Yes, it's an investment. Yes, it's a cost up front, but there is payback for it. Things like you brought up on the traceability, if you're trying to improve recalls, as you and your partners put in better systems, that gets better. Compliance with regulations gets better. It's not just about the cost. That happens too, that you can help drive, as you pointed out earlier. With automation, you can reduce some of the labor costs at different stages in the supply chain as well. So there's lots of payback for technology in different ways, which is true.
Well, I think there's one other element too. If you think about it, it's ultimately things like traceability and the ability to leverage technology will become a differentiator, and it'll become a differentiator because there's a cost associated with all the the recalls, things we just mentioned, and it's not just recalls. And so the easier you are as a supplier, as a customer, et cetera, to do business with, because you've got control of your data and can supply the needed or the required data, that's a value as well. And so, depending on where you're not, well, it can offset, sort of what your pricing is in the market, even what your branding is in the market. Because if your ability to interface with your customers and your consumers and suppliers is high, that's a value. And that's part of the total value equation as a company that you'd offer.
So as usual, when you bring up a good point, I'm going to come back at you and follow up on it. The last point on that one, I think, is that it is a value. It, as you said, though, you used the word, it's also a differentiator. Not everybody has the same level of capability. So what that tells me, we do have regulations coming that are, in a sense, more stringent on a lot of these things, obviously. Therefore, figuring out compliance and governance around that's critical. So here, it sounds like, in a sense, you're making the investments on the operational systems that are needed big time, which is excellent. So the next side of that is going to be saying, okay, so now that we are making those investments, they are paying off in a sense, and we have the regulations, we have the compliance. The last thing is just saying, okay, how do we, in a sense, show our governance and show the results of that? So ultimately, just like you have your sustainability story and a lot of other things on your website, it's in a sense another way to differentiate yourself as in a sense, a solution, for consumers and food service as well.
Absolutely, and there's good examples of that today. Even within our segment where there's some really good work being done, and you look at that and you want to be able to offer that same. So yeah, it's something we're focused on, and it's just another layer again in value that you can offer, and so we'll continue to look at that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I don't want to go into that 4-hour discussion we talked about on technology, so I'll leave that alone. Before I wrap up, Sachin, anything else that you have as points that I haven't hit yet that you can think of?
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, I think you guys pretty much covered everything. Craig, one thing, if I want to just touch base on is about the vision statement. How do you see this industry kind of going in next 3 to 5 years? One thing, I mean, I asked this from the perspective of consumers are looking at food differently. Whether it's plant-based food or it's a lab-based food, sustainability, organic. So from your organization, how do you see that in the next 5 years? I mean, I'm asking it from organizational innovativeness and the capacity of an organization to kind of innovate within to kind of reach those goals and those objectives. So maybe if you can build up on that a little bit.
Sure. So there's a couple of things in that. The first one is, what are we innovating around product, right, to deliver something that resonates more with the consumer and the changing consumer base. And so, I think I mentioned earlier on, as we look at our innovation pipeline, you'll see more and more products that are moving to cleaner label or, even in traceability, those kinds of things. You'll see that coming through and possibly even into other categories and adjacencies. From an organizational perspective, which is critically important, especially in the labor market we're in today, is how are we articulating who Idahoan is, who our company is, to attract and retain talent. I would say, quite honestly, for me, for the next 12 to 24 months, that's probably a bigger job and a bigger focus than anything else. For all the reasons that we've talked about, and I don't see that loosening up anytime in the near future. So really, taking the statistic that we know consumers are choosing brands based on their sort of their ESG and CSR stance, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the food they're eating, that's critically important. So you'll see us focusing in that way, and quite honestly, as a member of the executive team, that's probably one of my biggest roles, is to drive that forward and make sure that stays high on the agenda of our entire organization. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Great. Awesome. So Craig, I don't want to steal the rest of your day, but this has been an awesome conversation. It's interesting because I love your perspective, because you see all parts of the business and you see, in a sense, the whole supply chain. And like you said, unfortunately for you, you're responsible for all of it. But the good news is it's a great story, because you have a product that, in a sense, has a lot of wins for the whole marketplace, which is great. You've built a system around that that is now capable of, I'll say, delivering a lot of value. And you've shown me that, in a sense, you're putting in place what I call the necessary foundations to support new regulations coming down the road as well. And then working hard to communicate that story out. So hopefully this FutureFoodCast will help be a small part of that overall story for you, for sure. Anyway, so I definitely appreciate the time you've taken with us today. And if there's anything else on your mind, just let us know, and certainly would love to follow up. I think the impact of what you're doing in a year or two, I'll say, looking down the road, the new regulations are in place. There's a lot of changes in the market and so on. You on your end, not just the ERP systems and the technology, but as you said, you're having to make bigger investments on people as well.
Right.
You have to build, I'll call it a stronger, more stable workforce in today's world to compete. You're trying to automate at a higher level. That's a lot of changes that are coming down the road for you as well. So look forward to catching up with you at a future point to see how that whole story is unfolding as well.
Thanks very much for the opportunity, and looking forward to it as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Craig. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.